Coming up this week, we're going to be talking with Jun Ibahara about some lesser-known CPU architectures in NetBSD. He's going to tell us what makes these old and often forgotten machines so interesting. And as usual, we're also going to have answers to your emails and all this week's news on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 96, Lost Technology, recorded the 1st of July, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Yeah, we're glad to have you guys with us here. Wow, 1st of July already. Summer is coming up this fast, and we got another FreeBSD release down the, staring at us here in a couple months away. Dang. Seems like BSD Can is already long and far away. It's been so busy since I got back, right? But anyway, it's just craziness, and we have a ton of news today too. I think we have normally 7 or 8 stories. We got like 11 something today, like that, yeah. So we got a lot to get to, folks. So we're gonna jump right into it here. But one of the first headlines here is out with the old and in with the less. So I'm sure there's a pun involved there. But our friend Ted Ewingst has a new article up talking about various OpenBSD replacements and reductions. So one of the quotes from this is he's talking about, instead of trying to fix known bugs, we're trying to fix unknown bugs. It's not based on the current buggy state of code, but the anticipated future buggy state of code. Past bugs are a bigger factor than current bugs. So if you go ahead and read this blog post, though, you're going to see some of the examples of that here. He has some bigger ones and smaller ones of OpenBSD, of course, rewriting tools to be simpler and more secure. And he starts off with an example of a lesser-known SCSI driver that tried to do too much, and it got replaced with 3 separate drivers.
Right, and just even stuff for older hardware, things where there could be a bug lurking there, and no one's taking care of it anymore. No one's using it, no one's taking care of it. It's like, well, if we don't get out of the way, it could be the source of the next big problem. So.
Yeah, next vulnerability could come out of that. So one of the quotes he has here talking about the drivers is each driver can now be modified in isolation without the unintentional side effects on other hardware or the need to consider if and when further special cases will need to be added. Despite the fact that these 3 drivers duplicate all the common boilerplate code, combined they only amount to about half as much code as the old driver. Yep. So still a much smaller surface, attack surface area there.
And it's easier to read, and like you said, the biggest one there is that if someone has one of these pieces of hardware and they go and improve the driver for it, they're not going to accidentally break the driver for some other piece of hardware that they don't have and they can't test against.
True. Yeah, that's right. So in addition to that example, he kind of contrasts it by looking at Mandoc, taking a very non-Unixy direction, but at the same time being smaller and simpler than all the combined tools it was going ahead and replacing. So some points there too. But, of course, we've talked about a lot of the new different tools they have. The next case he looks at is the new HTTP daemon. And he talks a little bit about the recently added rewrite support being done, of course, in a new, simple, and secure way as opposed to just importing regex and dealing with all the fallout from that coming in.
Yes, because, every time we update the Perl-compatible regular expression library in the ports tree, that doesn't generate a whole lot of fun, does it?
Oh, no, not at all.
So I can definitely see the advantage of using that much simpler Lua-based matching system. Now, of course, the downside is it doesn't quite have the same amount of power, but in an HTTP URL, you usually don't need all that much. You're not trying to match strings from a log file or something like you are with the regular Perl regular expression. You're just trying to match a URL that already has a fairly machine understandable format.
Take this, move it here, do that. I mean, if it works for 99.9% of cases, it's fine. But he also talks about, I know we've had some security vulnerabilities recently with the file utility. And he talks about the rewritten file utility there. He says, almost by definition, its sole input will be untrusted input. Perversely, people will then trust what file tells them and then go about using that input as if file had sanitized it for them.
Right. Well, you're pointing the file command at this unknown file because you don't know what it is and you would like to know. And if it lies and tells you it's a perfectly normal JPEG and then it isn't, then
then you've shot yourself in the foot a little by trusting something you probably shouldn't have. But also, he mentions here sudo in the OpenBSD base system may be moving to port soon. So they're also briefly talking about a new tool that may or may not replace it called a DOAS, I guess is how they'll pronounce it, DOAS. But that'll be interesting. We'll see what ends up coming of that if that makes it in. But they also have a nice wrap-up of all the examples at the end and a pruning and polishing section, which is a great talk to look at, and some complimentary reading material if you want to follow up with this a little further. So yeah, that's interesting. I wish we'd see more of this happen. I think we're kind of hitting the point now, especially in the open source community. There's just so much cruft out there.
Leftover stuff from
Old
10 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we still find. I'm amazed some of the stuff I find in the ports tree still. It's like, why is that still in there? This hasn't built in years, or the site went away years ago.
That was the one that got me. When I went to submit a doc patch upstream for EE, the Easy Editor. There's no upstream site for it anymore. Well, actually, there's 2 or 3 out there on Google, but none of them. So they have different versions, and none of them seem to actually be the true upstream. They're all from the same guy. They just, he moved the website around over the years, and there's just old copies of it, stale copies of it, and his email address from all of them doesn't work. Nobody knows.
Bitrot is a real thing, my friends. We need to do all we can to protect it.
And I was quite surprised when I went to the BZip site and found that the last release was in 2006 in response to a CVE. It's like, well, I understand BZip works and there's no known bugs, but at the same time, it's like, is anybody looking at it at all?
Yeah, has anybody looked at it? I mean, I don't know. Or known, like you said, no known bugs, but what about it's the unknown ones I'm worried about, right? Well, cool. But yeah, definitely take a look at that. It's interesting, and good for you, Ted, for writing that up. I think that's fantastic, and it kind of brings attention on this, which I think all the projects should be looking at. BSD and Linux across the board. Okay, well, next up we have a whole bunch more OpenZFS and BSDCan videos have showed up. So we did mention this in last week's show, but some more videos from the second OpenZFS conference in Europe were being uploaded, and we got a whole bunch more here now. Well, they're all on YouTube, by the way. But Matt Ahrens did a Q&A session and talked about some of the ZFS send and receive, as well as giving the overview course about OpenZFS. George Wilson talked about a performance.
How that's changed over the time.
Yeah, how that's definitely changed to Toshiba, Soneto, and HGST. Also gave some talks about their companies and how they're using ZFS internally, which I'm sure that'd be interesting.
HGST talked about their SSDs and how those work with ZFS, but also an interesting one that I haven't got to see yet, but I'd like to, is they did a talk about the SMR, shingled magnetic recording, and how that's going to work with ZFS. And I'm glad to see.
Have they already started doing some work to make that all?
I don't know. They have a half-hour video that I'm going to have to go watch.
Okay, find out where they're at.
Yeah, because I'm very glad to see hard drive vendors actually, acknowledging that ZFS is a thing, and hard drives optimized for ZFS are something that there would obviously be a large market for.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd buy one of those ZFS approved stamp on the hard drive or something, right? That's awesome. Okay, also, speaking of videos, we got a whole slew of new BSD CAN videos as well. So I think this may be the last batch. Dan's in the chat. Maybe he'll
no, I don't.
that
I
for
think
us or not.
They're only at, I
think there's still a few more.
They've posted 34. There's still a couple more, I imagine.
Okay. But among some of the new ones which have showed up, we have Ryan Stone's talk about PCI SR IOV on FreeBSD. We have George Neville Neal did the Measure Twice, Code Once talk. Talk I did about unifying jail and package management for PCBSD, FreeNAS, and FreeBSD. Oh, and by the way, Dan says there are more videos coming, so this is not the complete set yet. But Werner Losch did an I/O scheduling and CAM talk. We have Kirk McCusick doing an introduction to the implementation of ZFS, which I think is just awesome that he did that. We have Midori who did a talk on extensions to FreeBSD Data Center TCP for incremental deployment support. And Baptiste did a talk, of course, on packaging the FreeBSD base system. Matt Ahrens on new OpenZFS features coming, supporting remote replication. Ed Schouten did a Cloud ABI talk, which we've interviewed him about, and that's really cool. And then Ingo Suarez, we have the audio of his talk about Mandoc becoming the main BSD manual toolbox. So that got messed up, but we have an alternate recording we can link you to here, an MP3 of that, along with the slides.
Yes.
Okay. So what do we got next here, Alan? Something about SMP.
Yes, SMP for PF and OpenBSD. So as we talked about a couple of months ago, Oracle has started adopting PF from OpenBSD for the next version of Solaris, and to replace their firewall. And so in the process of that, they've decided that they needed to implement the SMP stuff, and so they went ahead and did that. And they've submitted a patch back to OpenBSD, which they say attached is an SMP patch for PF. Consider it as a toxic proof of concept that has panicked his AMD 64 system, with attached screenshot. He says, I haven't figured out how to debug it yet. The problem is that the USB keyboard died, and then he had no way to type anything. He says, fortunately, the issue is 100% reproducible, which is, if you're going to have a bug, that's the best kind to have, because it makes it much easier to figure out what's going on than one of the ones where it only happens sometimes and you can't figure out why. He says the patch compiles in MP and non-MP versions. As you'll see, some more work is needed to stabilize it and to get the full SMP support for PF, but those PF features that have not been converted yet are the packet queues, packet logging, and PF sync, which is the system for syncing the state table between two firewalls so that if one of them goes down, the other one can take over and continue all the open sessions.
Okay. Well, that's really cool.
It's interesting to see other vendors contributing back to OpenBSD, and this is kind of probably one of the major steps towards getting SMP going in PF. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wonder if that means we'll eventually see a reunification of the FreeBSD PF with OpenBSDs. Yeah. If the SMP aware bits are all there. That could happen down the road. I'm not an expert. I don't know, but
I know.
Interesting.
When I was talking to Baptiste about his attempt to catch FreeBSD up to OpenBSD, the bigger problem was all the VNet or vImage stuff. And they don't really... OpenBSD doesn't have a system like that, and so they don't have the right hooks in place to do that.
Sure.
But yes, we'll see.
Well, TJ notes here in the notes, though, by the way, he says, before you start partying, the road to SMP, specifically the whole giant lock removal, is going to be a long and complicated one, and it requires that pretty much every relevant bit of the stack be written with that in mind. So that's definitely one piece of the puzzle. So this is going to be probably a long-term project, I imagine, to get this all sorted out.
If you want to catch up on how that's going for OpenBSD, see Henning Brouwer's talk from Asia BSDCon in March. It had a list of what's done so far and what's not, and specifically talked about how, well, there's a whole bunch of parts that are done. You can't actually start using them in SMP until these other parts are done too. And then it's kind of, it's slow work they've been doing for a while now, and at some point, it's just going to be like a watershed moment, and all of it will just work.
Yeah. So they have an irreducible complexity problem where it has to be at least this complex to function and do what it needs to do. Definitely. Well, no, we've all the operating systems had to deal with that at some point. Okay, so next up we have some Dragonfly news. So 4.2.0 has been released. So this is the next big update of their 4.x branch, complete with, of course, a ton of new features and fixes, the first of which here makes me really mad and jealous, but the i9-15 and Radeon graphics have been updated, and now they're the first BSD with Broadwell support in the release. Oh, you're killing me, guys. That's awesome. Good for you.
They also moved to GCC 5 already.
Which I'm not sure if there's... if they're doing any work to use Clang or not, or if they just prefer GCC. I'm not quite sure what the reason is behind that.
The status of Clang on Dragonfly was. Yeah.
Okay. But also, they've replaced Send Mail in the base system with their homegrown Dragonfly mail agent, and there's a wiki page. We have the link here in the notes, so if you'd like to take a look at how you configure that. And, of course, the announcement page has a whole slew of other changes there, including kernel changes, details on the audio and graphics update, removal of the SCTP protocol, improvements to temperature sensors, user land utility fixes, and, of course, a lot of updates to third-party tools. So definitely a lot of good stuff went into this release. And, of course, work is still continuing on the second generation of the Hammer file system. And Matt Dillon has provided a status update in the release announcement as well. So if you want some new Hammer news, definitely go check that out. And we have links to the Hacker News discussion you can check out, as well as links to upgrade instructions if you're coming from an older version of Dragonfly BSD. So I think we got a holiday weekend here in the States. This may be a good chance for some folks to get out there and try some of these.
Of course, the holiday is actually today here in Canada. Wednesday is the holiday.
Oh, that's You're
Yep.
working today. That's dedication, Al.
But
That's
it's just
awesome.
interesting to see that they replaced SendMail with the Dragonfly mail agent, because I know Baptiste had looked at replacing SendMail with that in FreeBSD's base system, and I don't think it was quite ready. But now that it's switched in their base system, maybe it's closer to being ready.
Time for a second look on that, I
Yes.
guess.
So
That could
if
be
somebody's
good.
interested in doing that, I'm sure Baptiste would help you get started with it.
I'll just put the call out if somebody's interested in looking at their graphics stack and porting that over. Please get in touch with me. We would be very interested in talking to you. So that would be fantastic. Okay. Next up, we have some open SMTPD news.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of mail servers.
5.7. I know. Speaking of another one, we have 5.7.1 has just been released as well, and this was a major milestone version that we had mentioned recently on another episode. But crypto-related bits have been vastly improved. In that, the RSA engine, is now privilege separated. TLS errors are going to be handled a lot more gracefully. Ciphers and curve preferences can now be specified, and the PKI interface has been reworked to allow custom CAs. SNI and certificate verification have been simplified, and the DH parameters are all 2048 by default. Wow, so there's a lot of stuff that went into that for a .1.
Yes,
That's cool.
I don't think we covered it in today's show, but there was a errata notice for FreeBSD about if you're using FreeBSD 8 still, even though the end of life is coming up, the SendMail included in base defaulted to 1024 DH for server-to-server communications, but for server-to-client, it defaulted to 512, which, since Logjam, most people's implementations have blocked anything less than 1024 for security reasons.
Sure.
And so there's a errata notice that if you're still using an old version of SendMail, it has the instructions on how to make it speak stronger crypto so that other people will be willing to talk to you.
Okay. It looks like in addition to all the changes I mentioned a moment ago, we got the long-awaited filter API is now enabled by default. So they say this is still considered slightly experimental, but definitely start playing with it now. And of course, docs have been improved quite a bit. We got some more examples and use cases, as well as a couple more exotic ones, and as well as some small additions and bug fixes, of course. So we have links to the full changelog here. And starting with 5.7.1, they're now cryptographically signing their releases to ensure integrity. So that's definitely a good thing to see. Let's see. It says this release has also gone through some major stress testing to ensure its stability. Giles regularly asks Twitter followers to flood a test server with thousands of emails per second, and even offering prizes to see who can DDoS them the hardest.
I remember seeing that on Twitter.
Like fun. Right? So, if you're a script kiddie out there, want to have access to some stuff where you can try and run a DDoS, there you go. They're asking for it. So, OpenSMTBD, of course, runs on all the BSDs, and it seems to be getting pretty popular lately. And TJ has a note here about how you guys need to encourage Chris to stop procrastinating on switching from postfix. Well, I guess you too, Alan. You haven't switched yet, right?
No. I just switched to postfix from XM. Leave me alone.
Right? I think I got my postfix set up 3 years ago. I finally got it all tuned and tweaked exactly the way I wanted. So, yeah, I've been a little lazy and haven't switched over, but I would like to at some point.
I did my second postfix setup on Monday night. Kind of in a hurry. The hard drive on the old my old personal mail server was dying. A machine I installed in 2006 with FreeBSD 6 and have upgraded in place all the way to 9.3. But being that the machine's from 2006, in 2015, the hard drive was on its last legs, and I had to migrate everything off quickly.
Cool. Okay, well, definitely a lot of good information there. So, yeah, be sure to hit the show notes if you're listening to this, like on the audio version or whatever. There's just a lot of cool links here so you can find out all the gory details and all these stories we talked about. But before we go to our interview here, we do want to mention the first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems.
With their fancy new website. Of course,
the URL for that. I know, they got a fancy new logo, new website. It's all brand new. So if you haven't looked in a while, you should take a look. And also, I think we have a news article here about FreeNAS 10, a developer's perspective. I assume you have that.
Yep,
you can
but
narrate some of that on your screen.
But the first one, just looking at the new page for the buyer's guide, they've kind of reworded it a little bit to talk about avoid the following things by downloading the guide and shopping at IX Systems. First, getting inaccurate or overinflated quotes. You know, you'll get a quote that seems like it's a reasonable price, and then you realize that, oh, it's missing these things that I need. Or you get some quote for some system that just doesn't match what you're looking for. And yeah, being sold the wrong hardware for your project. If you email some other provider and explain what you're trying to do, they'll be like, I don't know what anything of those are, but here, buy this. Whereas at IX, they'll actually know what those things are and help you build the right server. And,
yeah, I was going to say, I really love the color scheme on the new website. It's quite nice. If you haven't looked in a while, you need to go check that out.
Yes. But looking at the FreeNAS guide, they have a nice graphic here showing how, your web browser connects to the Nginx web server that they're running. And then that goes into the Dojo UI toolkit and the Django Python framework, which has a SQLite database on the back end. Then they have their middleware. And then you get down to the Unix commands. That's how you talk to the USB devices and the ZFS file system. And that's integrated with FreeBSD 9.3, which is what FreeNAS is based on. And then in the middleware, you have your Samba, your NetAtalk for Apple, and various other packages that make the stuff happen.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. You should definitely take a look at that, especially if you're planning on using FreeNAS 10 or doing any kind of development on it. Want to be involved in that process, definitely get in touch with the guys. And I think he mentions there's a IRC channel they hang out in as well at the bottom here.
They actually have an upgraded graphic for what FreeNAS 10 will look like as well.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at here. Their designs back here.
And,
that looks really cool. And of course, he has launched
and libZFS as well, so that instead of talking to ZFS using command line tools, they'll actually use the library. So that should speed it up slightly and make it easier to handle the responses and any error messages, so on. Instead of having to try to parse the human readable stuff from the command line, by using the library, you get even more stuff.
Oh, fantastic. So, okay, folks, we've told you week after week, but you need to go hit ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Let them know that we sent you. Get in touch with those guys, and they will get you hooked up with whatever kind of solution you're looking for.
So we're joined this week by Jun Ibihara. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Yes.
So the first thing we always like to ask people is to tell us a little bit about themselves and how they first got interested in BSD.
Yeah, I'm Jun Ibihara, Japan Uniform Nancy, jun@bsd.org. When I was 20, my university, 1987, my university has one brand new workstation called Sony News. Sony is a great electronic maker, but for me, Sony is the great workstation company. The workstation is 4.2 BSD, and I've run 4.2 BSD and run with run command and write down basic 2C translator with YSCC. Now started Sony workstation BSD Live. Sony News looks cute, look like personal computer, looks in hardware and run 4.2 BSD and X10 Windows system. So, yeah.
Okay. So what made you decide to go with NetBSD later on?
Yeah. In 1993, I've spun out from Fujitsu Group company to a small venture company called SOM Corporation, Sierra Oscar Uniform Mike, www.som.co.jp. So my Fujitsu friend told to me to make NetBSD mailing list. So I make NetBSD mailing list until now. So 872 people are joining and 10,000 mail in this 20 years. And one of my friends become Unix core group. So he said he's Hagino Junichiro. He's my friend, and he work hard for NetBSD core member. So I joined NetBSD group in this decade, and 21st century. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
With so many supported platforms for NetBSD, what sorts of hardware do you use?
Yes. Here is the first smartphone in Japan that called 003, developed by Sharp Corporation. So they run Windows mobile phone, but for NetBSD people, and it's a NetBSD machine. It has touch panel and USB connector and keyboard and Wi-Fi and run NetBSD HPC ARM system. And here is more smaller one and Sharp system. And for this is junk. Only $5. You can buy $5 in Tokyo area, and so 5 or $15 in Tokyo area, and all the mobile Windows mobile phone. But for us, and very small, some compact, and USB and touch panel, X window, and keyboards, NetBSD bulk build system. And next, this is Sharp PDA system. So Zaurus, Sharp Zaurus. NetBSD Zaurus running on strong ARM CPU processor and SD card and compact flash card and USB and running NetBSD completely. Another one. This is a Raspberry Pi 2, you know. And NetBSD started support the Raspberry Pi 2 system. And this is a Sharp networker system, PDA, Ubuntu PDA. But Ubuntu group stop support now. But NetBSD work well. And this Raspberry Pi and this small laptop called Networker runs the same binary. And this is NetBSD. This runs NetBSD EBB ARM. And also this Networker runs NetBSD EBB ARM. And so it has keyboard and small display and USB.
Yeah.
So it's very fantastic. Every CPU and running same OS on every platform and same form factor and another form factor and large one to small one. It's very interesting for me.
Yeah, and that small device there with the screen seems a lot more useful than a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
So what are some of the stranger systems or appliances that you've seen running something based on NetBSD?
Yeah. We are developing for my company porting NetBSD to every system, and another company porting to NetBSD such as television. My company porting NetBSD to television and router and printer and network camera. And another company make a hobby robot called Species running NetBSD SH4, and small factor compact robots running NetBSD system. Yeah.
Robots are cool. So in a world where most people only use 64-bit x86 machines, what makes some of these more obscure architectures so interesting?
Yeah, in the motorsports area, and today, this weekend, Goodwood Festival start in England, and there are motorsports manual repairs, all Ferrari and all Lotus and all Ford Mustang and all Morgan. It has V4 engine, it has a V8 DFV engine, and Matra V20 engines, and any engine that repairs and running all the car and running safety. It is great fantasy, great pleasure to motorsports fan. And computer mania are digging all the or the computer for being our computer and brand new OS, porting brand new OS such as NetBeans 7 running on old Omron workstation called Luna workstation and digging old computer from computer mania's room and paste repair old condensers and hardware and power unit and exchanger power unit and running current NetBeans current OS current system working very well in old computer. It's very fun for me.
So do you have any experience in replacing commercial operating systems with NetBSD in embedded devices like that?
NetBSD porting is very important for our company. So we make now debugging full stack router, IPv6 router and printer, and it's very usual thing for our company or porting NetBSD and NetBSD. Of course, embedded Linux is very popular in the nowadays. For device driver support is very good in Unix, but NetBSD is still remaining for embedded porting for in Japan. Many companies porting to NetBSD their products for Internet Initiative Japan make their routers, NetBSD routers for and has hired NetBSD developers. Many NetBSD developers work for porting internet routers called Xile. Yes.
Cool. So could you tell us a little bit about the Japanese NetBSD user groups and what kind of things they normally do?
Yeah, NetBSD user group started in 1999. So almost 50 members keep maintaining the JP FTP mirror and the web page and service web. Some are work the product running NetBSD. Some are work for NetBSD products and porting NetBSD and developing NetBSD and some are hobby programmers and they catch up tired for Linux operating system and restoring their hearing image to developing NetBSD and porting NetBSD and package sourcing developing. Please check, and we have Facebook page, www.facebook.com/netbsd.jp.
Cool. So if people want to find out more,
Yes.
they can go there. So have you had much luck actually educating people about BSD at the open source conferences that you go to?
Yes. Open source conference is like in Tokyo area, 1,000 people joined the university or other places, and 1,000 open source like people joining in the open source conference. Or people not know NetBSD well, but know other good software well, like Ruby soft and PowerSoft and CMS soft, and I never know many good software. I want to know many good software in this country. Many develops good product, open source products, and NetBSD is very basic Unix OS platform running every hardware you see, and NetBSD has a good packaging system called package source. So once we add package source 3, every people in the world try to compile, and every hardware try to compile their software. Every system have once try to compile and knowing the software, and it's great promotions chance for software developer in Japan. So we make NetBSD can introduce great software in the world to the world or platform.
Mm-hmm.
And basic BSD system is very good for open source software to the promoting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes.
Are there which areas of NetBSD do you think could be improved to make it more attractive to people?
Yeah. Yeah. I can introduce many software to the package source, and as I say, and I make two 2 GB image with Raspberry Pi NetBSD
Mm-hmm.
image for open source conference. Open source conference demonstration image to releasing in 2 GB image. 2 GB image has our favorite software, and our friends supporting the software and feedback to open source software to demonstration and developing for like Mikuta Twitter client we supporting and running these
Mm-hmm.
smartphone and to Raspberry Pi and the other hardware, old workstation to current 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 hardware to same software we are trying to running and such as bug bashing or hackathon like
Mm-hmm.
events each on each open source conference we make. So check the Potam at NetBSD mailing list. I post to Raspberry Pi image announcement.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Cool. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
yes, yeah. I'm helping Asia BSD conference. Last BSD conference, Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Tannenbaum talks very important things. We are making Asia BSD conference every
Yep.
March in Tokyo area. So we need more and more sponsors for us. So if you interested various scene in Japan, please welcome as a basic conference or supporting for more sponsoring for us. And in this November, IETF 94 meeting held in Yokohama. I supporting IETF meeting. So if you interested in Japan, please welcome IETF or other BSD conference.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. So before we get right into the news roundup, of course, we do want to mention another sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. And the URL for that, of course, digitalocean.com. How simple is that?
Mm-hmm.
Where you can go and get signed up. So even if you're already a customer of theirs, you can use this coupon code, FreeBSD Now, and apply that, and you'll get a $10 credit. I mean, that's good for basically running a VM for 2 months there if you're on their lower tier one.
Mm-hmm.
So how cool is that? A great way to get a new VM set up you can start playing with. I know I've talked to folks here about, we'll run Quassel up there, so we have my IRC balancer. And there's just lots of cool things you can do having something running up in the cloud, which is off-site. And DigitalOcean is going to make that about as simple as possible, including native FreeBSD support. Although if you want to throw OpenBSD in there, you can do that as well. We have had instructions on how to do that in previous episodes. So you'll have to
you actually
go take a look.
You actually get console access via HTML5 console, so you don't even need Java or anything like that.
Nice.
So that makes it possible to get at the machine, basically at the equivalent of the BIOS level, so that you can do whatever you need to do on the machine and keep it working. And it does everything you need. It's also a great way to just try out FreeBSD if you've never done it before and you want to set up as a server, whatever. It's out on the internet this way. It's got a gigabit internet connection, a terabyte of bandwidth, lots of SSD back storage, everything you need to, run a Minecraft server or whatever you want to end up doing with it.
All right. Yeah, they make it super simple. It takes about less than a minute to spin one up. And of course, you can choose the location depending on where in the world you are. If you want something close or far away, you can do that. I know you've talked in the past, Alan, about how you can set up VLANs between your different VMs and in different locations. So yeah, it's definitely slick. They have a really nice system set up for doing all this. So do check them out, digitalocean.com. And if you end up talking to anyone over there, tell them you heard about it on BSD Now. We'd appreciate that. Okay, first up in the news roundup, we have a FreeBSD Foundation at BSDCan. We have a trip report here, and usually they post some summaries of their various trips, but they've posted this time a couple BSDCan summaries.
Yeah, well, in particular with these, when the FreeBSD Foundation sponsors someone to go to a conference, one of the things they have to do in return is write one of these trip reports to explain what value there was in sending this person and so on.
That's right. So who was the first one we had
this one's from Stephen Douglas, and he said with the foundation's help, he was able to meet and network with many new people. He says we're expressing a sentiment that I'm sure most of us feel when we get back home from BSDCan. He says, where I live, there are only a handful of people that even know what BSD is, let alone can talk about it at a high level. That was one of my favorite things about being at BSDCan was being around so many like-minded people. I made new contacts like Peter Toth, who's working on IOCage, and we have an interview with him coming up, which is a modern jail management utility and very impressive. And he also got to speak with Sean Chittenden from Groupon, and was looking at actually implementing IOCage in conjunction with some new orchestration software that he's testing, and many other great things. And he said, other than the social aspect, he also got some much needed help with his Google Summer of Code project.
Nice. Okay.
That's what I like to hear.
That is definitely fantastic. Do you remember offhand which Google Summer Code project he was doing?
No, but I'm sure on the wiki we can find his name and find out what project he's working on.
Cool.
He says at the conference he also had the opportunity to learn for hours of every day of experts in various fields. He said he got to see Stephen Bourne's keynote, Matt Aaron talk about ZFS and the code flow between OpenZFS and the various operating systems that implement it, multipath TCP, and all that. He said the speakers all did fantastic jobs, and he was hoping to be able to get to speak, give a talk of his own in the future. And he said this is his first BSDCan and first BSD conference, but he enjoyed every minute of it. And he says it happened so quickly. At the same time, BSDCan seemed really long and really short.
It does. It's over before you know it, but you're just so busy. You're doing stuff the whole time you're there. Every moment, every day is packed with something.
And he says he hopes to be back to BSDCan next year, and also hopes to be able to make it to VBSDCon or Euro BSDCon. So we hope to see him more in the future.
Cool. So who is the second one we have here, Alan?
This one is Ahmed Kamal, and he's
came all the way from Egypt
to BSDCan, and he said it was a long trip, but he had a great time, and that he said many times during the conference, and he believes it's true. I'm here because so many people smarter than me are here. He says the flight was about 18 hours of travel, and a couple of long flights stringed together, and he seriously should have been tired out by the excitement, but it was keeping him awake anyway. He took a walk around the city for a couple of hours to freshen up, and then he met Li Wensu, who does a lot of the testing and Jenkins integration stuff at FreeBSD, and had an interesting discussion about Jenkins and documentation and ways that people can contribute to BSD. He talked to a bunch of other people about other stuff, and especially about how complex Arabic script is and trying to do documentation for that and so on. He says afterwards he went back to campus and joined the documentation session. Drew and Warren and the rest of the doc team there do these doc sprints, which let new people come in and get up to speed on
start contributing.
Basically, you join one of those nights, and by the end of the night you'll have committed a patch and understand what it takes and basically how to start contributing. I went to one of those, and now I'm a doc committer. He says he also learned some useful tricks, and he'll be contributing more documentation soon. And then he says by 9 o'clock his eyes turned red and his buddy was calling him, so he decided to go to sleep early so he would be awake properly for day one of the conference.
Then, he pretty much has a complete write-up of day 1 and 2 as well. Pretty long here.
Yep, talking about,
but he mentions going to all the different talks,
including Andrew Tannenbaum and Steve Bourne and lots of other ones.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, you might want to read through all that. I mean, that's a whole show in and of itself, reading through his report there. But it looks like they also had a couple more wrap-ups from Zbigniew Bodek, I believe is how you pronounce that.
Yes.
And
Velesevod Stokov, who's the guy that wrote LibUCL. Baptiste helped me convince him to come to the conference and get it sorted out. Yes, he was a great help during the UCL working group, and it was very nice to finally get to meet him in person after working with him on LibUCL for quite a while now, and get to he had his own slides and presentation he gave at the working group, kind of talking about where we are now, where he wants to go with LibUCL, and what some of the holdups are. And the working group had a bunch of ideas on how we could solve some of the problems that we're having right now. Like, you know, while UCL can support comments in the config files, if you read in the config file and modify it and then write it out, the comments are lost. And it's like, well, how do we manage to keep those? And especially do things like, well, if this comment is attached to this line and we delete that line, what do we do with the comment? And all that kind of stuff.
Oh, cool. These definitely a lot of good write-ups here. So just take note of this. I mean, maybe this could be you next year or at the next BSD conference. If you have a compelling reason to go and can't get there, talk to the foundation. Maybe be a Google Summer of Code student or whatever it takes to get you there next year. But of course, we'd love to see you. Yes,
and he also mentioned talking to Ted Unangst and John Mark Gurney about digital signature formats because he's building a Signify type tool for FreeBSD that will be compatible with OpenBSD but have more features. So he was, asking Ted, if you were starting over, what would you do differently, and kind of, gaining the advantages of all of
using his experience.
Exactly. And so there was lots of interesting stuff.
Nice. Okay. Well, next up in the roundup here, we have a neat article about OpenBSD from a veteran Linux user perspective. So this is nice. We got the link here. But of course, in a new series of blog posts, we have a new self-proclaimed Linux veteran user who's going to give OpenBSD a try for the first time. So he says, one of the quotes here, "For the first time, I installed a BSD box on a machine that I control. The experience has been eye-opening, especially since I consider myself an old-school Linux admin, and I felt out of places with all the latest changes on system administration." So the blog post here is pretty much a collection of his thoughts on some of the differences between Linux and BSD, what surprised him as a beginner. He says, admittedly, a lot of his knowledge did indeed carry over, but there are just minor differences, of course, in the command flags and some adjustments that need to be made to get used to that. He said one of the things that surprised him in a very positive way, though, was the documentation. He said OpenBSD's man pages are so nice that RTFMing somebody on the internet is not condescending, but really selfless. But he goes on through some of the basics, of course, of setting up his box and installing and updating software, following different branches. And he has a great pull quote he concludes with here. He said, "If you like Unix, it'll open your eyes to the fact that there's more than just one way to do things and that system administration can still be simple while modern." So that's a fascinating look at that.
Yeah, he also just opens up with talking about basically his whole computer history, starting with 386 with DOS, going to Windows 3.1, 9.5, 9.8, etc. But then in 99 getting his first Linux box, a Red Hat Linux 5.2, and we went to set up X, it started asking him questions he didn't know the answer to. So he's 15 at the time, and it was asking him, when he went to start up X, it's like, which chipset do you have? And he's like, I don't know. And it's like, what is the model of your RAM DAC? It's like, I don't even know what a RAM DAC is. And then, I need your monitor mode lines, but don't get them wrong, or I will physically damage your CRT. And he's like, I'm 15 years old. I can't afford to break anything.
Do you remember back when it was that difficult to figure those?
and it just makes you feel like that, old Unix graybeard every time somebody complains about how it is now and how it's so hard to set up. It's like, you have no idea.
That's right. I mean, heck, on a lot of these new desktops like PCBSD, I don't even write in xorg.conf anymore. Like, stuff just, the auto detection usually works. Wow. Okay, here.
Next up.
Let's see. So the next up, we have FreeBSD on the desktop. Am I crazy? An article here by another user. He said, so this is similar, of course, to the previous article. This is a guy who wrote the SSH two-factor authentication post we covered last week.
We told him to keep writing, and so he did.
He did. And this time he wrote about FreeBSD on the desktop. And this is an interesting one. I read through quite a bit of this here, but he begins with a bit of a forewarning for Linux switchers. He says, it certainly wasn't an easy journey, and I'm tempted to say don't try this at home to anybody who isn't going to leverage FreeBSD strong points. He said, definitely don't try FreeBSD on the desktop if you haven't used it on servers or virtual machines before. It's got less in common with Linux than you might think. He said, but with that out of the way, the list of the positives starts to get pretty large. He says a tidy base system, separation between base and ports, having the option to choose binary packages or ports, of course, ZFS, that's everyone's big winner, Jails licensing, and of course, he mentions the lack of systemd being a good thing.
Yeah, but also just the fact that you can choose whichever desktop environment you want. You know, oftentimes a certain Linux distro will be pretty well tied to one specific thing. It'd be KDE or GNOME or Mate or something. Mm-hmm. Whereas with BSD, you just pick one of these 150 desktop managers and go,
right,
and you're done.
Yeah, pick the one that suits you the best. But yeah, this post is pretty long, but he talks about some of the hurdles he had to overcome, namely with graphics and, of course, dealing with Flash, which is never fun dealing with.
It seems like he should have just used PCBSD and he would have been done.
He would have saved himself some of the trouble getting this all bootstrapped, for sure. But he did note one of the things he found is that Jails is not only good at isolating daemons, but also for desktop applications, they can work pretty well.
Especially if you have, if you need to have conflicting versions of the same software installed. Like I know Dan uses it to do regression tests on
Bacula.
Yes, Bacula, and he'll have 5 or 6 different versions installed at the same time to make sure that something didn't change with them.
Which is a super lightweight way to do that. One thing TJ didn't have here in the notes that he mentioned, of course, was how he set up Skype, which I thought was a good idea, where he basically just set up a headless VM and then did X11 forwarding and was able to launch Skype and even showed up in his tray properly and everything. So that's pretty cool. But he said in the end, it was all worth the trouble, and he's even planning on converting his laptop to FreeBSD soon as well. So that's neat. Well, you'll have to write another post about how that goes. I'd be curious to hear your feedback on that.
He does mention that there was no working Skype available. However, at BSDCan, somebody managed to get it to work. So we're just working on cleaning up the stuff in the ports tree to get that committed so that we can make that happen.
Yeah, it's definitely coming soon. That's part of that newest Linux emulation stuff that landed in current, which I did ask. It looks like that's not going to be backported to 10.2, which was a bummer. But
if it had been a month or two sooner, maybe. But yeah, I think it was too close now.
Maybe. But there's enough changes and stuff, so it's a big deal. But hey, just another excuse to run current for a while, right?
Luckily, there is a current version of PCBSD, so that it's not impossible to do anymore.
Yeah, you can run your monthly currents and get updated and all that. So it's not a very difficult thing to do now. Okay, well, next up we have OpenICAD and a Cisco CSR 1000V IPsec. So we have a cool article here, link, of course, in the notes, talking about setting up a site-to-site IPsec tunnel between Cisco 1000V routers and an OpenBSD gateway running OpenICAD. And he says, what kind of network blog post would, of course, be complete without the diagram where the internet is just represented by a big cloud? So we've got to have that. That's traditional. And there's a lot of details and example config files in here. So if you want to take a look at that, if you have access to a Cisco system like that and an OpenBSD box, you can figure out how to link those two together and using OpenBSD's built-in IKE daemon. And he goes on, to show, of course, that the BSDs generally play quite well with your existing network infrastructure. So if you were a business and you were afraid to try them, you don't have to. Like people have already done this and solved a lot of it for you.
They're usually, more liberal in what they accept and more exacting in what they put out. So that as long as what you're doing is standards compliant, the BSD versions of it usually will work, if not better than anything else.
Okay. Well, next up, Hardened BSD has come up with something cool here, some new news. I think they just sent this in this morning or late last night.
I think it was this morning.
So very, very, very fresh here. So this is, of course, Hardened BSD's ASR2 rewritten stack randomization. So They mentioned that they've improved the stack randomization area. So in their initial implementation, the stack randomization was all a random gap, and this update makes all the base addresses randomized as well. So they're stacking the new on top of the old as well, with the goal of being, of course, even more entropy.
Yes, I think they said that this way you end up with less wasted memory and more useful things. So sounds interesting.
That's right. Yeah, this definitely looks interesting. So it says, I think in the notes here, they said they fixed the Firefox startup issue they were having with that too. Nice. So that's kind of cool. That's been corrected.
Yeah. If you want to know more about it, they also link to the PAX documentation on what stack randomization does and how it works. So if you want more background, the link is there in the commit message. And they said that this will most likely also end up in their patch that's being upstreamed into FreeBSD as well. So looking forward to that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. But they said this change did trigger an ABI and API incompatibility. So the major version has been bumped. So just be aware if you're following that.
If you're using hardened BSD or attempting to import it into PCBSD or whatever, everything will need to be started over after this.
Yep. That's all good. That's all good. Hey, that's the price of progress. Next up, we have some OpenSSH 6.9 has been released. So they've, of course, announced the release of this new version, which following their major minor release cycle, this one's mainly focused on bug fixes. And a couple new things in it, though. We have the authorized key commands in the config. Now it takes custom arguments. So that's pretty slick. And, of course, one notable change for sure is that the default cipher has been changed. So the traditional pairing of AES encounter mode with MD5 HMAC has been replaced by, of course, Cha-Cha 20 and the Poly 1305 combo. Nice. So yeah, that is neat.
They also have.
So it says their next.
They have future deprecation warnings here, where they're talking about things. OpenSSH 7.0 is scheduled for release in late July, so about a month from now. And they have a list of changes that are going in there. The first one is that the SSHD config default for permit root logon will change from yes to no. That'll be a no up on FreeBSD where it's already defaulted to no, but that'll be a big change on a lot of other operating systems. Sure. Support for the legacy version 1.x of the SSH protocol will be disabled at compile time by default. You'll have to specifically request that if you want it, which should be good because nobody should be using that. Support for the 1024-bit Diffie-Hellman Group 1 SHA-1 key exchange will be runtime disabled by default because of logjam. Support for SSH DSS and SSH DSS cert host and user keys will be runtime disabled by default as well, using stronger keys instead. Support for the legacy V00 cert format will be removed. Support for ciphers will be disabled by default for Blowfish CBC, Cast 128 CBC, and all ARC4 variants, and also the Rungel CBC, which is an alias for AES. And also refuse all RSA keys smaller than 1024 bits, whereas the current minimum was 768 bits.
Okay. Well, that's good. So definitely that, plus, of course, the usual round of small bug fixes and improvements have been made. So you can check the announcement if you'd like to find out all the other gory details. And the native version, naturally, is an OpenBSD current. And we should be seeing an update to the portable version landing soon in various porch trees or package source. So keep your eyes open for that. Okay, so we're back, and of course we have some questions and feedback from you in the audience, but really quick before we get to that, we do want to mention another sponsor this week, which is going to be Tarsnap, and of course the URL for that, it hasn't changed, it's the same as last week, folks, so no excuse, you know how to go do this now. It's tarsnap.com/BSD Now, where you can go, fill out a little bit of info there, get yourself signed up, and before you know it, you'll be doing backups all off-site, and the way it's supposed to be, fully encrypted, where you don't have to trust that the remote end isn't going to look at your data or tamper with it or send it to some nefarious third party for some other reason, because they don't have access to it. It's all encrypted. That's the way backups should be done. And of course, Tarsnap makes that simple, and it costs next to nothing. So come on, there's no reason not to.
They have a great entry in the FAQ here. It says, Tarsnap automatically deduplicates your data. That is, it identifies and removes duplicate blocks of data from the archives that it stores. Well, any one archive will usually not contain many copies of the same data, although there are exceptions if you have multiple checkouts of a source tree or something. It's very common to have several archives containing different, created at different times that have a lot of the same information in them. So, for example, one of the tarsnap.com servers recently printed out the following stats from its hourly backup run, where this server has stored over 6,000 archives. Mostly hourly backups from every hour for the last 8 months, which add up to a total of 17,681 gigabytes, which is a lot. But after duplicate blocks of data are removed, or more precisely just stored one time instead, and you add the compression, this adds up to only 13.8 gigabytes. And then when you compress it, that only takes 3.3 gigabytes of space, and ends up only costing you $1 per month to store.
So basically what you're saying is it's super dirt cheap, and there's no reason not to do this. Come on.
You can store 17 terabytes for $1 a month.
That's
if it's
right.
dedupable enough.
So go ahead and get on over there, guys. tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Get signed up right now.
Only takes $5 to get started.
Yeah, come on. And that'll last you, as you just proved, 20 years?
Yeah. I still haven't managed to spend $1, and I've been doing it since January.
Oh, there you go. Cool. Okay, well, first up this week, we have Brad, who writes in with a zpool question. He says, hey, guys, I've wrote in a couple times before for various other things. I'd like to credit you guys as my main reason to look at and then move to BSD from Linux for the most part. But this time I have a problem with ZFS, or I at least think it is, causing reboots. So he says, here's the setup and history of his pool. He said, I have a pool I've been maintaining for a while now. It's a 6-disk RAID Z2 pool using 3 terabyte Western Digital RAIDs, no ARC, ZIL, log disks, and of course the zpool status report. So that's all good. He said the first machine it was in was an 8-core AMD processor with 8 gigs of RAM using FreeNAS. After a year or so, he said he moved the USB FreeNAS install drive and the zpool disk to a new current machine, which is using an Intel i5 CPU and 16 gigs of memory. And he said sometime in the last year, he moved over to NAS for free to try it out and see how it fits. He said, in the last couple months, I have a data set that has 3 files that cause an instant reboot if they are touched. He said, if I try to open, try to delete, or try to snapshot, or delete the data set, etc. He said these files used to be part of a FreeBSD jail, but that jail and most of the files have been deleted. So I assume the recent random reboots I get are caused by them as well. He said, I would blame it on NAS for free, but I've also tried to remove them with a FreeBSD 10.1 Live CD, 11 Live CD, Debian USB install with ZFS, Ubuntu USB install with ZFS. And he said, I don't want to, of course, have to recreate the pool if I don't have to, since I have about 4.5 terabytes at this point. He said, I even installed PCBSD to a 7th hard drive, and it reboots on touching these files as well. Yeah, I think we use the same ZFS as everyone else there in that case. So he says, what can I try, or is this a lost cause? I'm reluctant to give up and rebuild it because I don't learn anything about how to fix it that way. And he said, I'm just too stubborn to give up. I can provide any outputs you need me to. He said, thanks, and I love the show.
Right, so I've been emailing him back and forth since he sent this in earlier, late last week. Eventually, when I got the ZFS list, I noticed something that most people wouldn't catch your eye immediately. But the jail data set that he's having the problems with is incorrectly reporting that is 16 exobytes in size, which is the maximum size in ZFS. So it's more likely it's somehow got -1 as its size or something. And so, yeah, it's something went hinky in metadata or something there. And that data set is, it thinks is 16 exobytes in size, which is not the amount of space that he has. Nobody has a data set that size. So that's obviously part of the problem. He gets a couple of different crashes, mostly assertion checks in ZFS being like, hey, that number doesn't make sense, or that value is not what it should be, and so on. And so we tried a couple things with like using ZDB, and it has the option to look for space that's marked as used but actually isn't used, and so on, and to reclaim that. And when he ran that, it would give an assert, so we added the option to make it not assert on a bunch of things, and eventually it got further, but it seems to eventually crash the system anyway. So we're putting the data together and writing up a bug report, and maybe somebody with better understanding of the real internals of ZFS can tell us what's going on with that data set. But yes, it's great if he's willing to let us kind of
Hack
yeah,
on it a little
and
bit,
get
figure
an
out what's
expert
going
to look at it, because you know, he might be the first person to ever run into this problem, and if we can get it solved for everybody rather than having to have it go away, that'd be great.
on. Cool. Well, you guys will definitely have to follow up with that once you do figure out what the problem is, and hopefully there'll be a patch attached at some point. Okay, next up we have Mason, who writes in about the Opie follow-up from last week. He said, hey, I just started listening to the latest episode in my car this morning, and I wanted to jump in when you were saying there needs to be an Opie or similar available for phones. Then he points out the MOTP project over at SourceForge. He said, this exists for many platforms. I started using it on old school BlackBerrys because there was no S key available, but I've grown to like the time-based element to authentication, so I use it on Android today. He said there's different options available, but my long-time favorite is the Droid OTP by Jay Martins. And he lists links to that in the Google Play Store, and then an example of another Opie app. And he said a comment about port knocking. He said, yes, it's more useful for an internet-facing service than local, but generally you have to have better resources for dealing with abuse that originates from within your organization. The sheer lack of log traffic from all the doorknob twisting attempts when you use Nocti is priceless. He said this is in ports and security knock, and then he lists that in ZeroFlux as well.
I'll have to look at the Droid
That's cool.
OTP, but I'm not sure if it does the same thing that we're looking for. But yes,
Yeah,
thank you for sending that in, because I didn't know about that.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, I know. I bookmarked some stuff on port knocking the other day. It's like, oh, I should take a look at that. Okay.
So next up,
so who's the next one?
Jochin wrote in about PowerD on FreeBSD. He says, hi guys, I'm a longtime Linux user who got interested in FreeBSD recently. ZFS and jails have been more specific. He's encouraged by your show, thanks, and keep up the good work. I snatched up 2 old HP Z600 workstations with 2 quad-core Xeon CPUs each, and installed FreeBSD 10.1 on them. Everything works like I expect, and 2 jails are currently already up and running. But since our internal servers, which this Z600 is part of, are co-located, we've got to keep our eye on power consumption. We've been using an energy measurement tool to monitor the server, and we're a bit surprised when the idle result on the Z600 was around 160 watts, without the jails or any special services running. He says this seems a bit too high. So we booted up Linux on the same machine, and the energy management tool showed about 90 watts when idle, which is quite a difference. He says, I assume that PowerD would take care of most of the tweaking in this area, but it seems like it's just not the case. Any tips? And so I told him about the C states, the sleep states in the CPU, and enabling those drop the power to about the 90 to 100 watts that he was seeing on Linux. Although he was having stability problems on his older processor with it. Because this is an old Xeon like 5500, which is a couple of generations ago. Although I have some processors of the same generation, and they're not having a problem running in the sleep state. So I don't know if it's something specific to his motherboard or what. But we'd like to get help debug that and get that solved as well. Because, yes, FreeBSD in head anyway, that stuff's turned on by default, the C-state stuff, which we talked about OpenBSD getting recently as well. And so it'd be interesting to see what's causing his problems. He was saying, like, when it was enabled, if you did a ping, the first packet went through, but then none after that, and that seems very strange.
That is odd.
That sounds like maybe it's, just thinking of this now, his time source may be going to sleep, and he needs to just pick a different time source, like the kern.time counter or whatever. Because when the ping is sleeping, if it's waiting on a tick that doesn't happen because the CPU is asleep, that might be it. I wonder, but I'm just wildly guessing at this point.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Okay.
Next up.
Well, last up, we have a Simon here who asks about updating. He said, hey guys, I'm currently employed in a Linux shop. We use Spacewalk for managing updates and packages on our CentOS machines. I was wondering how you guys manage this in a big FreeBSD environment. Do you host your own mirrors? Is there a centralized update package manager for FreeBSD? Just wondering. He said, keep it up, love the show. And then he asked if we're going to Euro in October. So, well, first of all, I know you're going, Alan. I will not be going to Euro this year, but I'll try and hit VBSDCon instead.
So for mass updates, currently for our servers, we use FreeBSD Update to install the updates on the servers, and then PKG to install updated packages. And we're hoping that at Euro BSDCon, Baptiste will display package updating the base system as well. But if you want to find out more about that, see us talking BSD CAN that we mentioned earlier in the show. So yeah, you can do that with the tools that come in FreeBSD. I don't run my own mirrors, although I do have our own custom package repo, but that's because we customize the packages in it and we don't just use the stock ones. For most people, the stock ones are probably fine. Just for our specific uses, we're adding stuff to Nginx to handle video and stuff like that. So we have some custom stuff. And the BSD Now website has a tutorial on using Poudriere to do that yourself.
Okay.
On my laptop, I just use the PCBSD package repo because it already has default options that are what I want for my laptop.
Which would make sense there. Speaking of which, have you updated it to current yet, Alan?
I haven't powered my laptop on since BSD CAN.
Okay.
I only use it when I go
I'll
out.
have to get you switched over and have you run the current stuff.
Well,
Cool.
currently,
Okay.
my laptop actually is PCBSD 9 that's been rolled over a couple of times. And it's got the latest package repo of your head packages from 2 days before BSD CAN, or 2 days before I left for BSD CAN, and a head kernel from then. So
Nice.
a slightly more up-to-date kernel than you offered at that point. But it's because I had patches against Beehive that I was keeping current.
Oh, that's right. See, that's why we offer these, so you can mess with them. At least you're coming from a very similar, close starting point. We're not
So
like 6 months behind
having
now.
very close packages and so on was very helpful. Thank you for all the work.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, guys. So as we wrap up the show here, of course, we just want to remind you, send any of your feedback or comments to feedback@bsdnow.tv. So, of course, if you're trolling the nets and you see some story or something interesting or cool, or you've written something and you want us to mention on the show, send it in so we can try and get that in a future episode. And, of course, if you have something you're looking at writing about or just wanted to shoot the breeze with us a little bit here, go ahead and send something in. We'd love to talk to you. Also, if you're using a DNS crypt on your router to protect your DNS lookups, as mentioned in a few of our tutorials, we just wanted to, FYI, our producer here wanted to mention that OpenDNS has recently been bought by Cisco. So if you want to switch your resolver away, you can do that if you don't trust Cisco's security record. But he has links to some of the articles about that and whatnot. So if you want to follow up with some of that, you can. But I was going to mention, I like OpenDNS. I've been using them for a long time, but I was asking TJ, and he didn't know the answer to this. Maybe you do, Alan. Do you know if there's any good DNS filtering software out there that's open source?
So you want to do the same thing you're getting with OpenDNS, but do it yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that there is.
Possible.
It would be very useful to have, I suppose, wouldn't it?
It would be. It would be. So that's one of the things we do on the home network here. So anyway, if somebody knows about one of those, which could be used
we need
on
to
an open source system, that would
get
be cool.
one of
Send it
those
in.
and then have it as a plugin or something for pfSense and so on.
Yeah, that would be really cool. That would be really cool. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the show. We appreciate it. And of course, we will catch you same time next week.